Hello, Melonya. How are
I
you?
am exhausted. But
What?
happy Friday. Welcome, folks, to MT Fridays. I am Melonya, and you are.
I'm Tahitia, I
And
think.
yeah, today we're Tahitia and Melonya, and we are filling the brain drain one unscripted conversation at a time. So, yeah, we get together every Friday and we have chats about whatever comes up in our minds, right? And just to give you a little bit of background, Tahisha is a certified coach. She's in the DEI health equity space, a public speaker, a nurse, a content creator. She's fabulous. I'm a leadership coach, certified coach, trainer, facilitator, speaker, host of the Sovereignty Sage podcast. And today we're talking about what, Tahisha?
Well, today I am talking about time perception and stress.
Oh,
I don't
ooh,
know how fascinating it's going to be, but I was curious, like, why it feels like sometimes you feel like time is moving super fast or super slow, particularly during times of stress. So it has felt like time has dragged at certain points since the beginning of the year. And then it's felt like, no, it's just felt like it's dragged
uh,
for me.
that's interesting. And well, today I'm talking about how much is enough money, right? I've been seeing we've been seeing over and over in the news, uh, I think really since meeting you, I've been quite more aware of capitalism, right? And I see over and over, this person bought this billionaire bought that, or that billionaire, they paid billions of dollars for this, that, and yeah. And I'm hearing the billions number not a lot. And then when we see what's going on in our country, right? We're in the US and what the billionaires are doing. And I think to myself, how much is enough money? Like how much is enough? And should there be a wealth cap? So let's dig in, shall we? So tell me about time.
Time. Well, time is supposedly the way time is really how we perceive it, right? But for most of us, we're measuring it on this like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. And so I was curious why it felt like time was dragging regarding certain things and that time was moving quickly. And so I did discover that for human beings, time actually slows down when we feel stressed. That's why it sometimes feels like you're in something forever, like a stressful situation, why it feels like it's just unending. And that adds to this feeling of anxiety and stress that you have because even though time isn't actually moving any slower, it does feel in that moment like it's dragging. So, what I mean by that, for instance, is have you ever been kind of involved in something like super stressful, like maybe a court case or like an accident, and you're in that moment, and in that moment, it feels like that part doesn't end, or that situation felt like it dragged on a lot longer than it seemed.
I had a car accident, and it was interesting because, of course, that's a high stress situation. I was driving and hit some black ice, and my car started to. I didn't know I was on black ice, and I hit my brakes, and my car started to swerve into another car. And in that moment, it was like everything was moving in slow motion, and my brain was functioning in slow motion. My brain it felt like, oh, we're in an accident.
Yes.
It felt like that. It felt like my mind was narrating everything that was happening, but it seemed like it was happening very quickly and very slow at the same
At the
time.
same time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why do you remember when The Matrix came out with those first scenes of like the people slowing down and like everybody was like, whoa, that's like so amazing. But we could resonate on it because if you think about those scenes, they're actually stressful, violent scenes. And so our minds could actually imagine this happening, right? Because we've had this experience of something stressful happens and all of a sudden you're kind of disconnected from your body and you're watching it, but it's slower and you're like taking it in. So the research shows that like your mind does do this thing where it slows it down, perhaps so you can deal with that moment a little easier, but it also makes all of what's happening seem like it's much longer than it is. And so that can add to the stress that you're encountering too. And so that so that actually is called so during a crisis, I'm going to read this because otherwise I would not remember it. The brain lays down memories with exceptional detail. So when you talked about it felt like your brain was narrating it, that was kind of what was going on. And so your amygdala ramps up your memory so that this frightening event gets recorded in richer, denser stream than normal.
That
So
makes
that
sense.
yeah, so that was that thing because the reason why I started thinking about time was all of these events that are happening politically, some of them feel very intense and slow to me. Like things that I believe will impact me, I'm probably remembering in this sense because it feels like a super stressful moment to me. Which is why for some people, they might not remember these events or think about them with any particular detail. But for some people, even stressors of like politics or like normal living, you're going to remember that in more detail. So it's even more like hyper in your brain. So I thought that was kind of fascinating how we do that. And so then later on, when you recall the event, the density of that memory, the heaviness of that memory makes you feel like it lasted longer. So I thought that was fascinating. It's this memory illusion. And so that slow motion, they call it memory illusion. That's your brain's camera, and you're taking little snapshots so you don't lose that very intense, vivid, emotional experience. So I found that to be fascinating. I also found it to be fascinating that I always wondered why The Matrix and like that caught on so much with people as a stylistic film thing, but the psychology for why our brains would be accepting of that is like already there. So,
That's
yeah,
interesting. I think it's probably a mechanism because everything in our bodies, our mind is only focuses keeping us alive. So it would make sense that a very stressful encounter or a situation, your mind wants you to remember it in vivid detail so that you don't do that again, right? Or don't go next to that snake, or don't don't put a lit ember on your clothes or whatever. It makes it that much more vivid so that you don't repeat the stressful. I'm guessing because your whole mind is only about keeping you alive. It's
yeah,
right.
it's all that fight or flight, those fear reactions. What I thought about afterwards after like because I did like a first level dive into this. What I thought about too was, it's not necessarily tied to pain, right? Or like so this is more tied to like stressors that you remember in almost like a traumatic way. Because if you think about birth is painful, but yet most women do it again. Like not most, but many women will do it again, even though if you think about the act of birth, it's stressful, it's traumatic. Sometimes, there's a chaos to it. You would think that we would preserve this memory similar to a car accident, like slow mo, but we don't. Like many women don't remember details of their birth. Like, and I think that is, and from what I remember from my maternity classes, that also is protective for us as human beings. Because if you remembered it in the level of detail and like the way that we remember other things, you're probably not engaged in it again. You would be like, no, not again.
My mom used to say, "It's the worst pain you've ever felt, the first pain you'll forget." She's like something to that. It's the worst pain you'll ever feel, and the easiest to forget. You don't, for whatever, because she had 2 children, so apparently she forgot.
But memory is fascinating, and how we perceive time is fascinating too,
So let me ask
because
you. So
Mhm.
what's got you feeling? Are you feeling? What's got you feeling slow mo these days? What's going on?
So I think what's got me feeling a little slow-mo is, as a healthcare person or someone interested in health equity and a nurse, some of the stuff coming out with the I'm going to go to politics, the NIH and the HHS, the Health Services Department, some of the grants that are being cut, some of the research, narcissistically, I am interested in that because I do have a rare genetic syndrome that I always hope they'll research more, like find better interventions for. And so that felt very slow motion to me. Like the defunding and that, or the how they were going to be distributing grants, like I found myself like looking at that and thinking like, oh, this is happening so slowly to reach the public. Like these announcements are buried under other things, and I'm like digging for them, and like I kept thinking like, oh, it's still happening. Like RFK had a very long approval process. Like it went on well compared to others. Like it went on for a little while. And that felt very slow mo to me. Like I just want to know it I just want to know like what's going to go on with health. More than education, even though education impacts me from another perspective, like to me, the health stuff feels very slow. I want them to just like, when are you going to get the flu board together? like, like those things feel in slow mo to me. I
Well,
feel like I'll remember this part of the
because they
executive
are slow
orders
mo.
more than the others.
Yeah, they are slow mo. Um, yeah, it's a very surreal time. I'm this week I felt very tired. I feel a little defeated and kind of tired.
What are you feeling defeated about?
Um, Life.
That's not a valid answer. I
Yes.
mean, it is. I'm
No,
gonna take that for you from you on Empty Fridays. Let's dig deeper.
no, I think I I grew up in sort of a chaotic environment. And so have spent my adulthood not wanting to live in chaos, right? And so what I feel, my dog is snoring. I wish I were snoring. What I feel is that we're in chaos, and that's very exhausting because you want to have some measure of control over your life, right? And right now, things seem to be in other people's hands. And when you talk about slow mo, I'm still waiting for the rest of the country to wake up to what's going on and to have as much outrage and
You broke up for a second. Did I lose you? I think I
caring.
lost. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It feels chaotic and exhausting and very slow. It's like a band-aid that is slowly being pulled off, but being ripped off all at the same. It's that same motion, right? It feels like a band-aid that's being ripped off, like you just feel intense pain, but it also feels slow and excruciating too. So yeah, that's kind of where I am.
I didn't like any of that. That sounded terrible.
Well, some days are at rainbows and sunshine, and some days aren't.
It's funny you said rainbows and sunshines. My daughter used to say when she was younger, like probably 8th grade, ninth grade, she would go, "Mom, not everything can be rainbows and cupcakes
Yeah,
and unicorns."
yeah, yeah. It just isn't.
But
It,
why not? Like, like, I think we are geared towards the dystopian piece and the like not believing in joy because life is so stressful and I, I wish there was a way that we could focus on creating a life that leans towards more of the happiness piece. I don't know how to do that. But I wish that more of our sayings and more of our like thoughts in society weren't always leaning towards like, well, it can't always be joyful, right? Like a lot of our euphemisms are around like, well, suck it up. Like not everything in life is nice instead of like, yeah, how can we fix that? Like, because everything in life should be nice. Like that should be a goal. But I digressed over there. You were going to talk about
yeah, I'm talking. I'm bringing to the table. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I'm bringing to the table
because
a
I love
lot,
money.
a lot
No,
of,
I mean I love talking about money in the anti-capitalist way.
a lot of confusion. How much money is enough? How much money is enough? And I, started by sharing, um, this idea of billionaires. I know that Australia right now is they're trying to have a law that prevents billionaires from buying elections now. The United States has become a tale of
A case study in
yeah,
what happens with
yeah, we've
uncapped
kind of become a
finances.
case study in terms of what not to do, right? And so I thought about it, and I'm just wondering, morally, is it right for there to be multi to be a multi-billionaire? And I stopped to think, and I was reading something this morning because I was pondering this, and and there's this argument that if you limit how much a person can how much wealth a person can get, it might stifle innovation. And I thought to myself, well, there's other things that can motivate us besides money. And here's the other thing too, that's not to say that you can't be a multi-billionaire, you just don't get to keep it. That money is spent towards making society better. It's infrastructure, it's
So
arts,
wait a
it's
second.
culture,
So
hmm.
I'm gonna pause you. I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. Because the devil is money. So you're saying if I have a business or like doing something after $1 billion, like if this were an imaginary plan, this would be like after that, that money then gets to social programs. And how is that fair if I'm the one who worked to make that money?
Nobody works by themselves to make $1 billion. You have people who,
Then why do I have the $1 billion if I didn't work alone?
well, uh, what I'm saying is that your personal wealth caps at 1 billion.
But that's mine.
No, it's
Why is
not,
it not mine?
because it corrupts. That's why.
I mean, I believe that, but I would say, people would push back on that.
Yes, people do because they're greedy. And here's the thing, the people who would push back on it are the people who absolutely would never in their lifetime be a billionaire. But there's this hope in them that someday they're going to, rise to that level. It's called 1% for a reason. Not everybody gets there, right? And I'm because I stopped to think, if I, let's say, through my business, or I was able to generate a personal income of $5 billion, would I
Mhm.
get upset that they took that I would have to give 4 billion away?
Yes, because if you make
No,
$5 billion,
I wouldn't.
you're in a totally different,
Yeah,
like,
but I
you
wouldn't,
gotta
because
pay for your security, right? Because you're, like, top
you've got
coat.
more money than you
Somebody's
need.
gonna try to kill you, so now you need security. You need a better car, and then you're not gonna drive that car. Now you need
Mm-mm.
a driver, you got a staff around you. Like,
Wait,
with
no, wait a
this
minute. No,
money
no.
has
And you
come
and you
an
can still
entourage. You need a more secure home, you have to buy a different house. Like,
and you
so
can
now
still
I'm
afford all
down
of
to,
that.
like,
And
1,000,000,000.
you
Down to
can,
1,000,000,000, and now in the US, I have to pay for my healthcare, so now I'm down to only $2,000,000.
and now I'm down to $2.
That's $2.50.
Now I'm poor. I'm a poor billionaire.
Back to
I gotta
so
pay for I had a hospital visit. Now now I'm broke. Damn it.
more money, more problems.
It is, but here's the thing.
I don't need, well, I shouldn't say this. I was about to say I don't need security because I don't have any money. But, like, seriously, the more money you have, it seems like the more staff you have around you. And then I'm sure the staff, like, if I was working for a billionaire and I knew they funded my salary, I'd be like, "No, don't give up the money, bro. Like, you gotta keep it because you gotta pay my
Well,
salary."
again, excuse me. This is your personal wealth. This is after everybody's been paid. And look at Warren Buffett, right? Warren Buffett has lived in the same house that he did before he became wealthy, right? All of those things don't have to, you
Kendrick
know,
Lamar lives very modestly from
yeah.
what I've
You, you,
heard,
you
unless
don't
it's fake.
you
He,
don't
like, rides a bicycle.
you don't have to do that. And I did, I think in 1970s, I wanted to see how many billionaires were there, and the number was, in 1970 there were very few billionaires. Estimates suggest that there were possibly less than 5 billionaires,
Mhm.
right? And now this year there's 3,000 billionaires, right? But when you say, you have to
Yeah, but
get,
they're probably they're probably the equivalent of a millionaire, right? Like, there were millionaires in the '70s, and that was, like, are you doing it with a, like, equation of, like,
no,
in
no,
today's
I'm
market?
just curious to see how many billionaires have been grown over the years. But here's the thing. Back in 1970, you probably couldn't name who those 5 billionaires were, right?
JP Morgan.
I
No, I
don't
don't know.
know. I don't know. And here's the thing.
I'm
There's
saying
three.
that because my son was obsessed with him, and he was, like, the first multimillionaire in, like, the 1910s, and or, like, back in the day. He was on the Titanic, and this discussion was bandied about back then. Like, is it fair to have these, like, this was the first time, like, people were having millions of dollars versus thousandaires, I guess, like, because 1,000 was, like, a lot back then, and he was, like, the first multimillionaire who was just, like, boom, throwing money, like, and I thought it was interesting that, like, he's like the monopoly dude. He just starts, like, that's how he makes money is, like, through these monopolies of trade and finance. And, like, we see the similar stuff with tech, right? Tech is, like, how we trade a lot of information, and it controls a lot of, like, stuff. But, like, he never apologized for that money, but he was also much more, like, if you were to grade him, he was probably like a Gates Foundation sort of multimillionaire, because I think there was a little bit more of a I hate to say that in
Philanthropic.
today's yes, today's rich people are they seem less philanthropic, right? Like, I don't see a new Kennedy Center going up. Like, back then, they were much more, "I'm gonna build a bit," like, it was buildings in their names, it was foundations, like, they were thinking about, like, "When I pass, like, what am I gonna leave behind that society's gonna be like, 'Oh my gosh, this person who changed us in a beneficial way.'" I don't see that as much with our billionaires, right? Like, they're just like, "How can I sell you a new program to become like me, a billionaire?"
Well, not even no, not even how can I sell you? I mean, we have the world's richest man right now cutting funding for research. We've got health research for threatening Social Security, something that people are paying into. Uh, you know, uh, Wiping out money that help to stem Ebola and other diseases around the world. That's the richest person in the world.
So, but I do wanna say, like, I was a little confused because I heard something I think it was his mom. She said, like, he just wants to make the world a better place. And it got me curious, like, okay, he wants to make the world a better place, and what does he mean by that? Like, when we talk about, because I get how the government can be bloated and you can use those resources in a different way, more efficiently, but what they haven't talked about as much is, okay, you're gonna cut all these funds. Now, what are you gonna do with all those cuts to make the world a better place, to, like, heal people? That part of the plan by Elon has not been talked about. Like, does he mean, like, I'm going to take this money and make a more efficient way to fund healthcare? I'm going to make a more efficient way. Because I have heard this, like, like quiet little, well, he just wants to help the world. But the part after that, like, okay, what do you want to help the world do other than get to Mars, right? Like, because that for most people is not a priority. And I have been curious about that, like, how we can say, like, a rich person wants to help you. Oh, well, they're a helpful billionaire. Okay, helpful how? Like, how are they going to help people? And that's what I haven't heard, other than talking about, like, the energy piece with the cars, right? Electric cars and a better way to look at energy and resources and transportation. But he hasn't said that's free. Like, he hasn't said, like, everybody's going to be able to have access to all these great things. So I am curious, like, what are we doing with those cuts? Like, because he is the richest man in the world who claims that he also wants to help people, but doesn't talk about that part in
Because he
concrete ways.
doesn't want to help people. He wants to. He just got a multi-billion-dollar contract. I mean, he wants to help himself. And you have to ask yourself, really, like, how much money is enough? Like, how much money? If you've got all the money you've got the most money that anyone in the history of mankind has ever made, right? You hold that title. How much more money do you need? I always talk about the virus of greed, that like any other virus, it will propagate until it destroys the host, right? And that's the virus of greed. It feeds on itself until it's nothing but destruction. And the virus of power, and you put those together, they're like the two sides to a coin. And it really made me think, that it really brought to light to me that money does not make you happy. Because if you were a happy person with all the money in the world, I couldn't imagine not using that money to make the world really better. right? Like, I mean, there's so many things that you could do that would have such an important impact. I saw the other day, I might have been on Facebook, and I saw this man who was I forgot what his profession was, but it wasn't like this huge money making profession. And what he did is he saved his money and then funded kids to go to college. He did that on his humble salary.
I think money goes further than we think it does when we are not constantly competing with our neighbors, right? Like what is it? Keeping up
Keeping
with the
up with the Joneses.
Joneses. Yeah. Um, and that, like all of that psychology of advertising and purchasing. And if you think about like the fact that now in today's world, we have these fall seasons of fashion, like seasons of fashion, disposable fashion, and more people know about that than they did years ago, right? Like more people want to be fashionable, want to keep up with trends, which then produces this environmental issue of we throw or we get rid of tons of clothing. And I'm sure you know about this fast fashion and these trends. And if you're on a trend, then you're not going to wear that because it's last season. That was something that the general public did not even really know about. That was like a very fashion, like super rich people might have kept up with trends or people with fashion interests. Yet you'll see these trends that people do who like middle class, like, people participate in these things we didn't participate in and spend money on things that we would not have spent money on. Like I think my grandfather had two suits.
Well,
And that was
people
it.
had it was called the Sunday best, right? You had your Sunday clothes that you wore to church. That was really that's when got yourself dialed up, right? People didn't have a closet for their shoes,
Mhm. Like,
right?
we have more of everything, yet we chronically, talk about how we don't have, right? Like, we talk about the price of eggs and then might have, like, 12 pairs of jeans. Right? Like, we've got 12 pairs of jeans, but we can't afford eggs. Like, this is an interesting concept. Like, we will spend money, and I think I've talked about this with you on like skin firming stuff, like GLP-1s when we're not really overweight or obese, like
Well,
the
diabetic, because that's what it was. That was what it
di-
was.
diabetic,
Let's start with
the
that first.
vanity stuff. Like, and as we talk about how much money is enough, I think we also need to talk about, well, what is the level, like where are we comfortable? Like, where are we okay, like, just living? Like, as average human beings, where do we mark the, like, sort of like, "Yeah, you know what? I actually do have privilege. I do have stuff. Like, my wants are covered. Like, why am I buying shirt number 27? Like, I don't need this."
Well, you remember that guy Dan Price who owned he owned a business and was revolutionary,
Uh,
and that
livable
he
wage, right?
yeah, the livable wage. So he paid everybody, regardless within your title in his company, $70,000 a year, and he bumped that up to $80,000, right? And and that is such a it's really interesting because again, going back a couple of weeks ago when I talked about the fact that Bill Gates said that in 10 years, basically humans won't really be needed. And it was very interesting
I
to
don't know where we're going,
I mean, well, that's a question. That
right?
is a
Like, we're
real
not
question.
working. We got
And
no.
and then if you I don't know if you saw the Secretary of Commerce, I forgot what his name is. He was describing trying to say how great this tariffs are going to be because industries are going to come back to the United States. And and if you're a thinking person, you know that it takes years to ramp up industry, right? But that being said, he goes, and soon, instead of China making your iPhone, you'll have the job of putting those little screws into place, and then there's going to be the robots, and somebody's got to take care of the robots. And I thought to myself, well, damn, this is about as dystopian as you get, right? We're putting in screws. We're all just standing there putting in screws and taking care of the robots, and
I
work.
just want to say though, like, because I've seen some of the memes where like Americans are in factories and we're all like, ah, like, but like we're all sort of like, we don't want that. But like the reality is, people in other countries are already doing this. So it's highlighting the fact that Americans have been highly privileged because we didn't want those jobs. We sent them away, right? And now the cost of us
No,
having
that's not
sent
true. That's not true. It's not
what
that we didn't want the jobs. Greedy corporations did not want to pay.
well, we
A,
didn't want the job in the style that it was gonna have to be if the
mm-mm.
greedy corporations were gonna make a profit. Like, I don't wanna make $7 a day so that the company I'm working that's what I mean, like, the American public would not have worked under those situations, and there
Yeah,
were actions and
yeah.
fights
But
about that.
but it's not that Americans didn't want to work those jobs, because a lot of Americans came from blue collar, workers, right? And so that was a stepping stone for people. It's not that they disliked the work. The corporations wanted to they see capitalism and the United States, right? Again, the United States economy is grown on slave labor,
Which
right?
was free,
Which was free. And if you
free.
can't get slave labor, how close can we get to slave labor? So they went to these countries where people made no money. They paid them, a little more than they would normally make, which was something, but they were still, what's the word? They were still taking advantage of people.
Mhm.
Right. And then they were given tax breaks and all sorts of incentives not to have their factories here in the United States. But here's the thing. I forgot, was it Yang? Who was the was it in the
Oh
2016?
my goodness, I just looked. We have some comments in the chat.
Oh, oh,
This is me being yeah, so I apologize
sorry.
to Caesar who's put some stuffs, that's not a word, in the chat. Great comments here. Um, yeah, we spend a lot of money, so I'm gonna throw these up, show
That's all.
these. Appreciate you. Yeah, we spend money on what they want instead of their needs. Yeah, so we completely agree with that. Um, and he threw some
I have
great
50
comments in.
pair of shoes. Caesar,
Yes.
really? And only wear 4 or 5 of them at the most. That's the American way.
Yes.
We have a whole
Aw, thank you so much.
thank you for the last time I what bought was close to 10 years ago, and I have a price tag. Yeah. We are I'm just going to change the view here. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm going to change the view. Let me go back here. Forgive me. Yeah, we have become, we are consumers. We really are. But who was it? I'm trying to remember, who was it in the 2016 election that talked about paying people, because our economy is changing, right? We There might not be jobs for people. So how is there going to be a time where the government just pays you so that you can live?
You mean the people that are left? Because
Yeah.
they're like with anything, there's like, a period of time where the old isn't replaced by the new. Like that's an interesting question because I have wondered like if we're not working and if we're not doing these jobs and if robots come in and take these jobs and yada yada yada, like who's buying all these things the robots are making, right? Like who is left to kind of keep the wheel turning? Are we all social media content creators at that point? Is it just like a weird pyramid scheme that none of us see the top of it really, but we're all just working for something and spending? And like, it is fascinating because, like, if we can't buy things, then what is our value? Because we grade a lot of our worth by like how much money we have and how much we spend. It is like it is a little concerning that much of our life is dependent on being consumers.
Well,
Um,
I don't know what the end game is. Again, you know, again, we're talking about, how much money is enough. If you between AI and between again, robotics and things of that nature, the way that we work today is going to be very different. And again, Bill Gates is talking about in the next 10 years that most of us might be obsolete in the work that we do. So how do you sustain a society when and have the two things happening at one time? There's a push for around the world for people to have more children, right? But then what is the work to sustain those people? And if there is no work to sustain those people, how do they then consume the products and services that are being put out into the world? Right? I don't understand how this works. And I don't know if there is an end game except to just make as much money as you can right now and not worry about about humankind. Don't worry about the environment, don't worry about anything. Just keep making more money. I wonder how it ends.
Well, I think there's been some captures of conversations, right, that say, like, well, we're not so much worried about the planet or the world here because if we make enough money, we can always leave and we can go someplace else, right? Like, so there have been little snippets of that, right? If you have enough money, you can insulate yourself against whatever happens if you have a lot of money. So Caesar has a question in here. What salary do you think is comfortable? Um, the average person makes about 43. And so I saw something, Caesar, where for nurses, they just so I'm an RN by licensure. They just recalculated the living wage or a livable wage for nurses. And in my state, that's in the 90s. Yeah. Which to me is wild because if you're thinking about that salary as the minimum salary for a nurse in New Jersey, where I am, then you're like that bumps a lot of people up. Like, how are you going to afford that salary? What happens to those who are, at different work levels? Like a livable salary here, like in New Jersey, I know for a family of four, they've even raised it as far as like colleges to being over 50,000 or I think it's like 70 here or something like that.
Think,
Like it's you need a decent bit of money to live.
but
I would say 100,000 for a
But
single
here's the
person.
thing, and this was a something that was done some years ago. They said that after about $70,000, in terms of annual salary, you don't receive any greater like satisfaction from making more money, right? When you're when your needs are taken care of, you know, you can pay for your house or your living, you can pay for your food, you can pay for your clothes, you can pay for your car, you can put money away, you can go on a trip, right? If you're able to do those things, right, the satisfaction of buying more doesn't is not really satisfying, right? It's not really satisfying. He said, my secretary makes 85, so I wonder how
I
people
wanna
are
be his
surviving.
secretary. No, I'm
I,
just
you know what? All right, Caesar, I can type, okay? That's no, you know what? That was like the
But
old
you know what? I'm gonna
man
say
is crazy.
this.
That's crazy.
Your 70, as you said, was years ago, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you think about it today, the average house in my neighborhood is like $500,000. Um, I've been here 30 years. But, like, if that's the average price and I live in what's considered like a middle like and the housing prices are just a little insane in New Jersey. But if you think about like what salary do you need to make to buy a house, because that used to be the goal, I would think, you know, Caesar's right with it's got to be over 100,000 at this point, because most houses are not coming in below that. Like in Philly in the 70s, a house was 30K and the salary probably was like, I don't know, six like 8, 9. Like if you look at our minimum wage, federal minimum wage has not kept up with the states. I think it's around 7. Many of the states have double digit minimum wage. Um, and it still doesn't hit the mark. If we're going to turn more things over to state versus federal, like you probably do need to look at, well, what is a livable wage in the United States? What does that look like? And then does it make sense to bring some of these industries back or to create these tariffs that force us to look at, well, how are we doing production? Is that something that should be staged differently? I'm not against bringing back production and industry to the United States. I do think that you have to create, as you mentioned before, the infrastructure to do that. We don't have or maybe we do. I'm like that's not my area of expertise, but I don't think we have the physical infrastructure to have all of these industries come back. And I would say the living wage is going to be the piece that's going to be the sticky piece for us here.
So I'm looking at
It,
the Economic Policy Institute in January 31st, 2024, for a full-time worker supporting a child in the New York metro area, the living wage is 52. What is it? Is that 52? Is that
52
$52 an hour? Or is that
$52
52,000?
$52. Yeah, and the Fed so part of our problem is, like, federally, the federal pay rate has not gone up with the cost of living, right? Like, the cost of living and even when you think about the cost of living raises that you might have gotten in at a company, it's in my mind, I was always like, "This isn't really that much compared to how much everything goes up." So, we have not kept up with the cost of living in the United States. We haven't also added any benefits to that $8 or however much it is, right? Your healthcare still has to come from somewhere. And if you are making that minimum wage, I also wonder because then you can participate in certain programs depending on where you are on the poverty line. Like, should you have to be at the poverty line where you can't afford to get anything or to participate in consumerism in order to get healthcare? I think there's some things that we could do to make the livable wage last a little more. I do think even at 100,000, if that is so, and then the other question is, when we talk salaries, are we talking this is the salary the company is paying you, or is this your salary after you take everything out of it? Which is a big difference because
So
we still pay a lot in taxes
so
and for benefits.
I'm looking at Zippopia, and it breaks down living wages per state. So and I don't know if this is really enough. So they say, like in Washington D.C., $867 is
Living is not prospering though. Like,
in Hawaii is 60,000. In
Hawaii is
Massachusetts is
very expensive.
59,000. In Connecticut 59,000 plus. New York 59,000 plus. That's really interesting. But again, now that a lot of things are going to be more privatized, that you know that we're covered in our through our taxes and things of that nature. I really I don't know. I don't know what a living wage is these days.
Well, and I also think we are a country that doesn't talk a lot about how to do personal budgets, right? Like, I do remember there was this class I took because I'm a kid of the 70s. Home economics was more than just cooking, it was also about a personal budget. And I remember talking in class about this is how much you should spend on housing. Like, there was this percentage of your income that you had to earn this much and you should be saving this much and you should, and we even talked about how much you should donate to like charities. And it was the 8th grade. And I remember, like, it was like you're going to need to put aside a little money to save. And like my kids didn't take home economics because it was cut by then. Because our goal with much of education has been like educating to the test, so we look smarter than we actually are. Test taking is not critical thinking. So I will say, like, I do think we, even if that is a livable salary or a livable wage, I don't think Americans are prepared, or Americans are knowledgeable enough to look at that money and say, well, here's how I'm going to split that up. Cause that is also like taught to us, like how to do a budget and how to, and how many parents sit down and do that as part of, I'm going to tell you about the world.
What was that? My job field pay for an entry level position is 97 to 130K. The newbies have roommates and often bring lunch to work because they need to save. So trust me, we are definitely living in a different era. Yeah.
But, I will say, like, bringing lunch to work, that wasn't necessarily an exception thing. It was sort of the norm for many of our parents. They brought, like, a brown bag of lunch. We and all of those commercials they have of, like, go to the cafeteria, the automated cafeteria where, like, they have sandwiches and stuff. Like, that was the new concept. But I will say going out to eat is, like, prohibitively expensive now, right? I went celebrating with a friend for, like, an early dinner, and I think we spent over $100, like, for not, I mean, the food was great, I'm not
But
gonna lie,
but not
but
but
that's a lot of money.
I'm thinking about, that 97 to 130K that Caesar was talking about. You know, things are different now, right? Again, we talked about housing prices, right? So, if young people want to buy a home, right, they've got to save much more, right? If the average housing cost is 200, 300, 400, $500,000, right? And you've got to have a certain amount for down payment, then that means that you need to save more. They're also seeing that safety nets like Social Security, that not safety nets, this money that you have invested and was
If that
taken
goes
from you.
away, I want that money back, by the way.
If that they're seeing that so they have to plan really strategically for retirement and things of that nature. He said they spend most of their money on Starbucks, but that's a funny thing. We Uber Eats, not we, I don't do that. But there
But
we
some of that is the psychology of acceptance, right? Like, in order to be accepted someplace, I start to mimic and take on behaviors of the area I'm in. So if everybody is bringing in some type of takeout coffee, I want to be cool. I want to get the takeout coffee at an office. This is why work from home It does 2 things. Like, it stimulates the economy when people don't work from home, because then, like, you're not making as much food at your house, right? You're buying stuff as you're on your way to "I forgot to get coffee, let me get, like, a coffee." Like, it for like and then I have that I run into people, I see that like, there's this whole mentality of, like, takeout in Starbucks and, like, what's acceptable, and now Starbucks isn't, you have to go someplace else. You have to
I'm
go to, like, a
curious,
different place,
Caesar,
but
what do you think a living wage is?
oh, he said he thought it was above 130, I
Oh,
believe. I think he said,
really?
like, 134. Um, yeah. And so, Cedar, I would be curious what area you're into, if you're in oh, he might I think he left.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. 130. That's interesting.
But I think that's valid and accurate, because if you think about the fact that it's so like, if you think about housing, and if it is supposed to be about, whatever they say, a third of your salary, believe, at least that's what I remember growing up. If a house is 400 and something dollars, then a third of that puts you around, a little less than 100. So I think if you're talking about, and remember, just because there's requirements to put down less, like there are 3% mortgages you can get, that means that your payment's going to be higher. Um, so I think there's a whole lot at play right now. And finances are going to be the big thing. And the fact that people can't live the lives that they saw their parents live, that they saw their grandparents live. Um, and what does that mean psychologically as human beings? Like, yeah, so
So I personally can't survive off of less than 220K take home after taxes.
we can teach you how. It
With
involves a lot of composting. No, I'm kidding. Growing your own vegetables.
grow your own vegetables, Caesar.
Chicken farm in your backyard.
Yeah, it's really it's going to be. I mean, we're living right now in historic times, and it's really going to be very interesting to, I say, for a lack of a better word, to see what is going to happen in this country and globally, right? Because you have other countries and you have different alliances forming. You've got BRICS out there, and their countries coming to the table that were never really even considered before. You've got Brazil, you've got Africa, you've got, I think there's 23 countries that, he said allergic to manual labor. All right,
So
Caesar.
so I was gonna say this though, even aside from the country piece, people are smarter than ever before. I know we like to think that, computers have dumbed us down, but we're actually smarter than ever before. Much of the work that we do involves a lot of critical thinking and a lot of, multiple tasks at the same time. We do more multitasking than ever before. Very few of us concentrate just on a single task as we do it, because if you think about the fact, like, while we're doing this podcast, or right, or this live, are like, you might have email going on. I saw you look down and go, I'm going to research this real fast. Like, this multitasking is something we've never done before. Like, we are so quick with answers, faster. The average person is just faster at how they use technology. The old, oh, it's a computer, this person won't know this. That's all going away as all of us upskill. Like, my mom will, like, talk to the chat GPT for stuff, and, like, I never would have imagined that. So I think it is making our jobs less manual and more creative and more prone towards critical thinking, but the pay is not going up for that, right? Like, to multitask is a skill. And like, what does it look like to sort your brain like that? To constantly have technology and to do that kind of high level research? Like, what does that look like? We are not paying people enough. And AI is not creative. You and I have talked, it's not going to come up with the idea unless you tell it, I want you to come up with an idea based on this, right? It's not, I hope it's not somewhere just like, what can I think of today, right? We ask it to think for us. When it starts thinking on its own, that's when we need to be frightened. But like, are we paying people enough?
No,
Like,
not according to Caesar, we're not. And Caesar, I like the way you think. I do.
we do, we love it.
You, that's what we are at. We are at the top of our hour, and thank you for hanging out with us, Caesar, and making this a fun episode with us. But I think it's going to be interesting to see the way that work changes
Yes.
in the world with AI, with robotics, and what that is going to mean for wages, right? And what's that going to mean for our cost of living, and what's that going to mean for our quality of life, right? And we know, because during the original industrial revolution, right, jobs went away. There were some jobs were created, some jobs went away. So we know that through AI, some jobs are going to go away. They're going to go the way of the dodo, right? And so it's going to be really interesting to see what our economy is going to be, and what work is going to be valued, and what the pay is going to be for that.
I'm dying to say this because I know we're at time, but I still want to say this, which is fascinating to me because we're getting rid of some of the education support. And if you think about like the technology piece, no one magically knows how to communicate with AI, right? You're going to need some training. You're going to also need to upskill people on how to be creative, which takes a base of like information. Like there's nothing like book reading to spark your brain to imagine something that isn't there, right? TV has visualized how you're going to do that. But the print image makes you imagine things in your brain and fill in the bits of the story. So like how are we preparing ourselves for what to me looks like a much more in your brain thinking future for human beings? Like as Caesar said, I don't like I'm allergic to manual labor. Yes, but how are we going to upskill our people to be the creative pieces running these robots? Like, because if I'm not going to be sewing the actual product, then I have to understand how to program that. Maybe I'm watching over a few of them, but like, are we going to be smart enough to do this? And
Well, there's going to come a
if
point
we would
where,
destroy our systems of
well,
education.
it's going to come to a point that where AI is writing its own code, right? So you're not even necessarily going to need coders like you do.
It's right. It's writing code, but it's not coming up with the idea, which I haven't seen it come up with an idea
Yeah,
yet
just
that
wait.
I didn't put in its
It
head.
will.
Stop it. I don't want to be afraid of my little friend.
Yeah, I know. I know you don't want to give up your AI companion, but
I'm
yeah, I
not going to
know.
name it because then I might marry it
Yeah,
like someone else.
there you go. All right, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today for another episode of MT Friday. We'll be back next Friday. Until then, keep thinking and keep
Thanks for
being a
joining
good
us on
human.
MT
See you next
Fridays.
week.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here, so keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.